just message me or whatever. Okay, so so sometimes I feel compelled to say a few things. Just to clarify where I'm coming from with people I work with ongoing or closely, but I'm not sure if I've said it in this group yet. So to me, this is very important to get across at some point, and that is that I don't know what awakening is. I don't know what spirituality is. I don't know what Buddhism is. I don't know what enlightenment is. I don't even know what time is. I don't know what separation is. I don't know what is there when there's no separation. I don't know what self is. I don't know what other is. I don't know what Zen is. I don't know what this right here is, and I don't know if it's even now. I don't know what any of that means, really. So in a way, you could say I'm completely unqualified to talk about this. Something here comes from a place of complete unknowing, and that's undeniable. To suggest otherwise would be misleading or inauthentic. So authenticity to me is key if we want to approach an investigation into our true nature or into the nature of reality, the nature of self or the nature of no self. All of those investigations are fine, but it's important to start where you are always in this moment. Start with a authentic recognition of what is happening or not happening, and more importantly, your relationship to it. Whether you can find someone, you can find a sense of separate self here that is somehow relating to reality, or you can't. That's a pretty immediate investigation that can get us to a place of authenticity. Yeah. So in our immediate experience, do we find something that's apart from life, navigating life, making decisions, suffering, finding a way out of suffering? Can we find that one? Can we find that individual in our experience right now in a very direct way, in a real way? Where does our attention go when we look for that? Where does my attention go when I look for the sense of me? And can I look for that without having any preconceived ideas about what I will find or what I won't find? That kind of pure looking, pure investigation is it's its own purpose. It doesn't need an outside validating paradigm or context. It's fine just the way it is. This looking, this pure investigation, pure curiosity, let's say, pure innocence, into what is this right here? What am I right now? Where does attention go when I don't modulate it? Does it drop into the body, into sensations in the toes and the hands and the groin and the chest and the head? Does it move into sensations, sounds? Does it move into sounds? Do I hear a hum in the room? Do I hear a hiss? Do I hear ringing in the ears? Voice. Does this tension naturally move there? If it does, that's great. Perfect. Fine. So be it. What if we try to direct attention into where am I right now? Where's the perceiver? Look right there. Where's the one that's feeling this experience as its own? And attention will move there. Because if there's anything we can do, we can move our attention. So let's move our attention right to that. What is that which is experiencing this right now? Where is it? Meaning, we're not looking for a thought. We're not looking for a thinking answer. Because if we find an answer and it says, oh, well, I'm a body mind and I have a nervous system and that nervous system produces a sense of self, fine, that's fine. But that's a thought, yeah? Why is that not the me? Well, because when that thought's not there, the sense of me is still here, clearly, yeah? Another thought could come and say something different, and that sense of me is still aware of that thought somehow, however that is. So it's not in a thought that we're going to find an answer to this question. And yet the question burns, doesn't it? It's interesting, isn't it? Shouldn't it be interesting? We spend our entire day thinking about how we relate to everything. So shouldn't we find that one that relates, the me, or just the sense of being a me, or that which seems to be aware of this voice, that which seems to be aware of its spiritual journey, that which seems to be aware of the room it's in. So this inquiry that I'm pointing to right now, this is a way of becoming thoroughly authentic, if that's possible. It's a way of going to the root, as we were talking about. Winter, the season of winter moves to the root. So let's move to the root. Let's find where all this is coming from, seemingly, this experience. And when we realize in this looking, in this curiosity, this investigation, maybe it's more of a feeling than a looking, it's fine. That it's not a thought. A thought can be here, and that's fine, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for that which is aware of thoughts, clearly. It can be a sound, but again, the sound we can be aware of the sound or not aware of the sound. And yet, isn't there something that's aware? It seems like it. I'm not saying there is, and I'm not saying there isn't, but it seems like there is. It has that sense. So what we're doing is we're investigating a sense that we've taken for granted for a long time. Maybe we haven't, but thoughts seem to talk about it quite a bit, right? My problems, my life, my dog, my cat, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, my realization, my interests, the things I care about the most, the things that are most important to me. Like, we assume it all the time. It's fine. Thoughts are here. We all know this. We're all aware of this. Simple, right? So what is it that's that those thoughts are pointing to, if anything? So that's where this investigation points. That's where this investigation looks. And I would argue there's a huge value to the looking, to just the looking, right? So you could say, in the value system that we inherit by being a person, from other people, from media, from everything we come in contact with that has to do with communication, you could say we are making an assumption, or there is an assumption, that there's value in arriving. There's value in figuring things out. There's a value in getting somewhere. There's a value in having the new thing. There's a value in arriving at a level of status in your job, and there's a value in finding wholeness in life. There's a value in getting to a place of balance in your relationship, whatever. There's a value in finding some kind of state equilibrium in the body, yeah, and health and all that. There's value to all these things, right? But all those things have one thing in common we don't always notice, and that is they're all about some kind of arrival. They're all about something that we can mark and say that's a place we've gotten to. This kind of looking that I'm pointing at right now doesn't have that value. It's not bound by that value. It doesn't have to arrive. Yeah? And so we learn about this through doing it, through the practice itself, through the looking, let's say. That we learn of its intrinsic value, and which is not in an arrival place. It's not in a stage of awakening. Its value is not in being healthy. You know, there's nothing wrong with those things, of course. There's nothing. It's great to be healthy. It's great to, whatever, take care of your body or eat well or take care of an illness if you have it and take your medicine like you're supposed to. And there's value to all of these things, of course. There's value to having a transformation in your perception, a massive transformation called awakening. There's value to that. But this that I'm pointing to, that can only be accessed right here, which is great, can only be accessed right now, always, which is part of its intrinsic value, you could say. It doesn't need to arrive. It's that simple. It's very simple. It's simpler than simple. But it can teach us. It can teach us by doing it, by being it, by investigating in this way and pointing. It can teach us. It doesn't teach us about something intellectual. It doesn't teach us something conceptual. In a way, it doesn't even teach us something we can use, because we're too close to use anything. It's too intimate. So what it teaches us is about intimacy, is what it teaches us. It teaches us that intimacy could never not be here. It teaches us that innocence is here. It's not an arrival place. Unknowing is immediately accessible. Knowing is fine. It's important to know when you are driving somewhere. You got to know where you're going, right? It's important to know how to assemble a piece of furniture. If you want to put together a piece of furniture, you have to know about that, right? You have to have information. But this can underlie and does underlie all of that. It underlies knowing. It is intrinsic to the experience of being alive. And yet it doesn't actually have to know anything. You could say its unknowingness is its value, its power. It's not in a value system though. So even the words I'm using are a little heavy, but the sense of it's what's important. The sense of an unknowing, of a starting from the place that I really can't or don't need to rely on anything from the past, any experience from back there. It's not necessary here. This is vulnerability when you really let it dissolve down into the body mind, into the senses. It's a willingness to let life unfold without having to get our dirty little fingers on it, without having to try to change it, make it something different, better, more peaceful, more relaxed, more transcendent. What if we just let it unfold? What if it just does unfold? I mean, there's no one even to let it do that, right? That's what this unknowing teaches us. That's what this momentary investigation, that any of us can do anytime, right as you go off to sleep, right as you wake up. And it doesn't matter how long you do it. It's not held to a standard. So it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter if you do it for 1 second, 10 minutes, or all day long on a retreat. It doesn't matter. The access is always there, right? That's the beauty of this. It can't be lost, so it can't be found, can't be somewhere else. So, so self-inquiry is a bit of a paradoxical process. It's a paradoxical term. It's actually a very paradoxical term, right? Who's doing that inquiry? But that doesn't matter, because again, that's getting conceptual. So self-inquiry is a wonderful thing. And the key is, a couple of the keys are not to be rigid about how you apply it. Yeah. The questioning is what matters. The curiosity itself is what matters. And the curiosity can apply to self, but it can also apply even to the senses. When we hear a sound, when there's a sound, just sound, there can be a curiosity. And you could almost say, as you attune to curiosity itself, you're going to start to attune to sound itself. Because in sound, there's something completely unknowable. It doesn't have a far and a near, this sound. It's teaching us something. It's unknowable. It's not fixed. It's not something you can find, touch, grab. And yet, sound is sounding clearly, obviously. Intimate. That's intimacy, yeah? So a little bit of curiosity here, a little innocence into sound. What is this? What is this? Then stop thinking. That's inquiry. So you can investigate sound this way. You can investigate a sensation this way. It's extremely common, maybe ubiquitous, maybe everybody who goes through a lot of this experiences it, but there's a very common experience of a density, contraction, maybe pressure in the head. It can be in the chest and the gut as well. But I think almost everyone here probably has experienced it in the head at some point. It can be extremely, I don't know, almost like distracting. Attention can fixate on it. Other times you just sort of feel it in the background. But as we de-identify from the mental constructs of self, it's very common for energy just to be released into the head. It's freed up. It doesn't spend all its time thinking about itself or about how it relates to the world and life all the time. It starts to free itself up. And that feels like energy. It is energy. It feels like pressure. So we can also apply inquiry in the way we were describing to the pressure. So we can, to that density, the spot. We can just ask, what is this? Where is this sensation? When we strip it of beliefs, history, it's been there for a day, it's been there for 2 weeks, whatever. Let's just drop that thought. Let's drop that conclusion and go back into the mystery, into the innocence, to the inquiry. What is this? Where is this? So the movement of inquiry itself is very powerful, and it's very adaptable, because curiosity is natural. When realization unfolds, you could say, so much goes away. So much is dissolved out. So much is seen to have been an illusion, to have been heavy, to have been related to the struggle. And when we stop struggling, there's a lot that we seem to be struggling against that just kind of vaporizes. And that's how it goes. But I could almost say although I would hold this lightly, that if anything remains, you could say something like innocence remains, something like curiosity, very, very natural curiosity. The curiosity of, the toddler laying in its crib, looking at the side of the crib, the color, the shape, the form there, without thinking about it. It's not thinking crib, it's just color. It's not thinking color, it's just that. That's natural, innocent curiosity. It's very enjoyable. It's very blissful when we're not wrestling with the mind anymore in that moment. That kind of natural curiosity. You can find it in touch, like touch anything. Put your hand on something cool, and there it is. It's not in the hand, it's not in the mind, it's not in me, it's not in the surface. It's just sensation. Pure, unbound, not here or there. It's not bound by the distinction between here and there. It's just sensation. Yeah. There's a certain, although I will say it's very subtle, there's a certain curiosity to it. There's a certain awareness in it. And then when you feel into that awareness, you feel into that natural curiosity. You could almost say it's the whole of whatever reality is experiencing itself as that sensation. And you could say that because it is. It really is. That there can be experience at all is an amazing thing. That there can be this non-dual, not here, not there, not happening to somebody, but just this sensation, the physical sensation of touch. That it can even be here is so mysterious. It's astounding from its own experience. It's amazing. The only thing we can do with concepts and thoughts is run away from it into an explanation of what it is. Why would we run away from it? Well, there's no real why to that. It's a habituated response we learn growing up, becoming an adult, etc. We learn to live in the world of thought. But all of the compelling reasons thoughts give us that we should live in the world of thought, they don't actually know anything about this touch sensation I'm describing. It's not, in a way, they're of two different worlds, you could say. The non-dual world, the experience of this sensation, this one color or this touch sensation, the experience of that itself is fully enveloped in itself. It's complete. It doesn't come and go. It's not bound by any concept, belief. It's not. And so the chatter of the mind about that, about sensations, experiences, the value system it places on them, right? Sex feels great. Being confused feels really not great, right? There's a whole value system on this that we learn and we impose upon our experience of life. That value system doesn't know about this touch. It doesn't actually know because it's not knowable, if nothing else, but also because it's a bit of an escape from it. It's a moving away from it because it's, you could almost say the thought system doesn't trust it. It doesn't trust what it can understand. It doesn't trust what it can't put in a box. But you can't put sensation in a box because sensation fills up the universe. The experience of it, when the experiencer collapses into the experience, when it's a singularity, let's say. You can't even define its edge by the physical universe. Isn't that wonderful? It's too real to even enclose in physical and non-physical. That's curious. That's fascinating, isn't it? That fascination is in the sensation. It is the sensation. So sometimes we can practice with sensation. We can turn this sort of inquiry onto the physical, the sensations of the body, the colors and shapes in our field of vision, or a sound. And we can learn from that. We can learn from that attunement how this looking can also be applied to thought, to consciousness. Okay, what is it that seems like it's experiencing all of this? Let's just look for that in the same way, with the same curiosity, innocent curiosity that doesn't need concepts. Can we look in that way? Can we look from the curiosity? Can we look as the curiosity? And when we do that, we can just stay there. You don't have to force anything to stay there, because there's no one to be there or not be there. The struggle only struggles with struggle. Struggle itself is an illusion, because reality doesn't struggle. Consciousness doesn't struggle. It's just consciousness. Sensation, sound doesn't struggle with anything. It just is what it is. Yeah. So wherever our attention moves in whatever field, whether it's a sensation field, into the face and the mouth, the lips, the chest, the gut, or whether it moves into sounds, some music, background sound in the room, or it moves into that flowing world of thought and consciousness. Even if it's a lot of movement up there, when we're having a thought storm or stirring our own thought storm up, it's fine. Attention can move into that, and it's just consciousness. Consciousness itself has a non-dual conformation. It's always non-dual as a basis, you could say, and then it can seem, through a certain kind of will introduced inside of thought, inside of consciousness, it can seem to become like kind of polarized in consciousness and perceive a me to whom everything is happening. It can perceive a sense of a fixed self to whom all of this is occurring. And I would say that conformation of consciousness ends up being where most of the attention goes once we learn to be an adult, once we learn to be a human, a person. In children, it comes and goes all the time. A child can become identified very quickly, and it's uncomfortable. That's why they sometimes throw a fit, cry, dig their heels in. I don't know if they call it this in other countries, Israel or whatever, but in the United States, there's the term, the terrible twos. When a child turns 2, it started to develop its sense of self. It says, I can say no to mom or dad. No, 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 no. And people call it the terrible twos. But you could say it's actually recognizing how uncomfortable it is to be in a self. But then that toddler, that child, comes in and out of self all the time. This is why we feel so connected to children, because they're just present. They're simple. They don't live in that world fully yet, until they're early 20s probably, when it starts to really solidify. Children are in presence a lot. Just watch a child play. Watch them play in the sand, or with their dolls, or with another child, or anything. Even when they're in their imagination, actually, they're still quite present. You just watch them. But they are conscious. They're conscious. There's consciousness there that they're experiencing. So when we start to investigate this nature of, I'm just going to call it polarized consciousness. Consciousness, or the inner thought world, where we seem to create a world out there, a life out there, and somewhere in here, a me that's experiencing that life. the one that has relationships, that has a family, has a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a husband, a wife, that has problems, has solutions. The one for whom life seems to be happening, right? We find ourselves in that conformation of polar consciousness. And that's often the entry point of spirituality. We realize this is so uncomfortable. A lot of people that aren't even interested in spirituality or whatever will tell you thoughts are uncomfortable. I can't stop thinking. I can't meditate because I can't stop thinking. When they're emotionally triggered, it'll come out, God, I can't stop thinking about what that person said. I can't stop thinking about the person I broke up with, right? This is what our minds do. And the more emotionally charged it is, often, the more hyperpolarized it can feel, the more uncomfortable it can feel. That's a clue. That it is like that is a clue. It shows us that when it comes to the physical, the sensation of being in a body, especially when it's, I'm going to call it intense, although that's a qualifier that's not necessarily placed on emotion. But when the emotions become intense, when they become, I'll say overwhelming, but that's really putting a judgment on it. It's like more like it overtakes the physiology, right? Falling in love, feeling jealousy, feeling grief for someone that, we didn't want to not be there. We didn't want them to leave, however that happened. When those overtaking emotions, when they literally take control of the physiology, they make us cry, they make the body shake with anger or whatever. That's when we really go into our head, right? That's when that polar consciousness, you can see it. It's that escape vehicle. It wants to be up here where I can solve the problem instead of down here where I can feel fully that the body has completely been overtaken by an energetic emotional experience. If you don't like the word emotion or whatever, it's fine. It's the energetic experience of being a human in the energy field. When something conditions trigger that body to really be overtaken by that physical right now experience, that's when we really run into our head. Isn't that funny? Because in spirituality, you could almost say that's where we want to go. We want to go to the place where we don't separate from ourselves anymore. We don't separate from the sensations anymore. So the clues are here all the time, that this polarized consciousness, this sense of being a self for whom life is occurring, to whom life is occurring, to whom life is happening. To the sense of being that self may be the root of our suffering. I don't like to jump to the conclusion and tell you there is no self, because what's the point? I'm not a Buddhist scholar, but from what I've seen, what I've read, and what I've heard about the Pali Canon, the suttas, there are many, many mentions of no self there. But Buddha was very careful to, from what I understand, to never quite say there is no self. He just said, look here, there's no self there. There's no self in the thought. There's no self in the sound. He kept saying where there's no self. He's pointing to this looking, the value of the investigation itself. You don't need to come to a conclusion about it, because reality is it vibrates with so much reality itself. It's so much more real than the distanced thought world, that it doesn't need to make conclusions. It's self-obvious. It's self-validating. That's the beauty of realization, yeah, of this whole deal. That there is a possibility. I don't want to say an arrival place, because arriving is kind of like in time, and it's suggests location. This is non-locatable and it's not in time, but there's a possibility that we can be absolutely satisfied without having a conclusion about anything. This is how I started the talk, saying, I don't know. I don't know if there's a self. I don't know if there's no self. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care about that argument. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. Those are conceptual. To see that the self is a concept is important. To see that no self is a concept is important. To see that all of this is the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra points to this so clearly. Realization is a concept. Arrival is a concept. All of it. Concept. There's nowhere to stick. Reality doesn't stick. Reality doesn't find itself anywhere. It's too close already. It's too real already. It's never fixed. It's never bound by a certain way of being. It has no inherent confirmation. That's the freedom of it. It can be very conceptual until it's directly experienced. Then it's freedom. Beautiful freedom. and the way, one of the very important ways, in my opinion, to keep investigating is to reclaim this freedom, let's say, is to keep investigating and being authentic. As long as there's a sense of self, just keep looking at it, even if it's very subtle. You know, as a very smart person says, what you can see through the sense of there being me and still have a sense of there being my life, my world, my all of it. So it's always valuable, in my opinion, to return to this inquiry. Find out who's on this end of the relationship between me and life, me and my problems, me and other people, all of it. That's that sense of the relationship itself, that maneuvering, negotiating, that sense itself is valuable to investigate. And the investigation is simple in the way we practiced at the very beginning here. Where am I? Where is that sense of me right now that's having problems, whatever, stuck? Now, I'm going to talk about a special case that occurs with this. Special just meaning, I don't think everybody comes completely in contact with this, but most people touch into it, and some people it becomes their whole experience. And it's something that happens after awakening. And it's very subtle. So if it doesn't make sense or it's not your experience, it probably doesn't matter. But there can be this, to put it in a simple way, although it's not quite experienced this way, it's kind of like we get so tired of identity. We get so tired of being a me that's suffering in life, feeling anxiety, always trying to solve problems, always feels distance from life. We get so tired of that when we drink from the cup of awakening, when an awakening occurs, it's so blown out that things feel so clear, so non-substantial, that in a way that we can't actually come in conscious contact with, our nervous system, let's say, it sort of identifies with that. It's kind of a negative identity. It sort of identifies with there being nothing. This is one of the reasons I don't talk about no self so directly a lot. I don't say there is no self, because it's very easy to identify with that after awakening, because it's like this massive escape movement almost, right? It's like identifying with awareness, even if you don't call it awareness. It's sort of identifying with there being nothing here. That's not exactly true. There's a whole other experiential side to reality that can be overlooked, can be misunderstood when we come from the experiential belief. I'll call it an experiential belief that there is nothing, no self, no, I can't find anything, there's no solidity anywhere. Yeah, that can be a little bit of a way to hang on to mind, to the thought mind. It's like hanging on to the non-conceptual thought of nothingness. Reality is too free to even do that, let's say. Your true nature is too free to even bind itself into no self, into nothingness. It's not a self that the other side of what I'm talking about is defined by, because it's actually not defined by anything, but it's a certain kind of intimacy. It's a resting place that's so intimate, it can only be found by thoroughly and completely seeing that there is no resting place. It's paradoxical. It's very hard to talk about this, but it's important if we find ourselves in that place of no place that's just a little too empty. That's not what emptiness means, not shunyata. It's more like no thingness, awareness. the awareness trap or whatever. So just know that this kind of investigation I'm talking about, like if you're like, I have no sense of self, I have no sense of I anywhere, what the hell does I am mean? Trust me, I know that paradigm for sure. I've been there. And yet, in a very practical way, you can still investigate, okay, well, who is it that believes that? Who is it that's holding that view? It's a view. It's a very subtle view, but it's definitely a view. That's where you're looking. Look back there, right? Look for the me, the one that seems to be experiencing that. That can be very valuable. It can really turn things experientially that you can't do by reading, by learning more about anything that in a way can't even be explained to you because it's just too close. It's too intimate. So again, this inquiry is applicable at many stages of realization. Actually, it's quite valuable. And I think, I don't know for sure, but I think this is what Ramana Maharishi, why he pointed in such a singular way. I think, from what I've read, I haven't read a lot of his stuff. Well, I mean, I have read his book, and he didn't even write it. Someone wrote it from what he wrote in the sand, from what I understand. But I think that's why he's so singular in his teaching. Some people think it's like, oh, he hasn't talked about the deeper stages of realization or something. Fine. But I suspect the reason he points in that way is because as long as there's the subtlest sense of volition, will, view, even if it forms momentarily in a certain set of conditions and then goes away and comes back, if it ever shows itself, I think it can always be valuable to keep looking. We know by then we're not going to find it. You're not going to find something, go, oh my God, I found the self. There it is. It's inside me, and here it is, and I can take it out and show it to somebody. You're never going to find that, and you know that. You can learn that pretty quick. You can learn that from 5 minutes of looking, right? But the looking itself, again, it's kind of a conduit from human consciousness into reality, because it's made out of curiosity. If you do it this way, if you do it properly, meaning don't come to a conclusion, don't try to get somewhere with it, don't think you know where it's going to lead you, etc. It can be valuable. What holds the view? What is it in relation to the view, whatever that view is in the moment, the one that triggered you, whatever. John Sherman points to this in a nice way. He says it very basically. He has a very singular basic teaching as well. That is, put your attention in the same way you would put it on an object. Put your attention on what it feels like to be me. That's another way of saying it. Is that clear as mud? Did any of that make sense? Yeah, okay. Does anyone have any questions at the moment? Can everyone feel into that pure looking that I'm talking about? Very innocent, very immediate, not needing to make a conclusion about it.
I actually have a question pertaining to this.
Of course.
Because I feel like I've been at kind of where you're like talking about in the last couple of weeks, which is kind of like confusing, right? Because you're like even like communicating, or I don't know.
Yeah.
it just feels like you don't know how to interact once you're there, or like where to go from there.
Yeah, that's right. That's perfect. Okay,
So.
let me address that a little bit. Yeah, and
Okay.
so the fact that you mentioned when talking to people is important, because I'm going to simplify it, but it's not that far off of reality. That language and thought are very, very similar. Okay, the way we talk to other people and the way we self-talk are very similar. If you watch your own thought process for a day or an hour or 5 minutes, you'll see there are sort of characters there. You have the parent identity and the child identity, right? You'll come in contact with some experience, and part of you wants to just get pissed off and whatever, or part of you wants to just cry and be like, ugh. But very quickly, before we even register that, that's the child identity, right? Before we register that, the parent identity comes in and goes, oh no, I know better than to yell in this situation. And then it starts thinking about why. It's that because I understand how that person is. I'm more understanding. Or, okay, if I get upset, then this will happen and that. Like we start to go into the parent identity and almost like talk to ourselves and tell ourselves why we shouldn't be feeling that, right? This happens so quickly and it happens all the time. But if you really start looking at your thoughts, you'll see that throughout your life, you formed these different identities at different levels of development. That's what self-talk is. That's what this internal voice is. The thoughts are largely the story of them. The story that thoughts tell is largely based on experiences we had growing up, interacting with other humans, etc. And that's through communication. So communication with other adults, let's just say communication in general with people, strangely is kind of the antithesis of what I'm pointing to. What I mean by that is even people that I work with, that I know are friends or whatever, that have had very profound stages of realization, one of the biggest challenges they often have is talking to people still. They do fine with it and they function, but that's where they still feel the contractions often. And that's because we've learned through habituation, and our nervous systems are amazing. They can learn very quickly. And they've learned through hundreds and thousands of interactions with people every single day for years and years and years. So they have very ingrained pathways, our nervous system does, our nerves. They have very ingrained pathways of how we communicate with others and how we internally communicate. And they're very closely tied together. Okay? Social anxiety, great example. Almost everyone can relate to social anxiety, and for some people it's crippling. But all of us can experience it at some time or another. So the internal voice, the thought world, and external experience of communicating with another human are very intimately tied together, okay? So with that said, when we start to come into this place of unknowing, this place of vast curiosity, unknowing, we are actually sort of shutting down that system in the moment, at least. We're shutting down the internal self-talk. And when we shut that down, it can be awkward to have the external other talk, literally communicating with people, okay? Now, that's just how it goes for a while. You'll definitely adjust. Like, I'll cut to the chase. You're going to adjust to this. Everyone does adjust to this. But it is like learning a different way to live, because you're kind of, Adyashanti says, it's like an alcoholic who's been drinking all their life and they stop drinking. They're clean, but then they have to go to a bar every single day and hang out with people who are drinking. That's what this is like in a lot of ways, right? So understand that the first thing is that most people you talk to aren't going to be doing this. They're not going to energetically value dropping out of the identified thought world into this place of letting it all go completely, realizing all of that shit is just thoughts. My life, my problems, what happened 10 minutes ago, what happened 2 days ago, my relationships with everyone around me, to a large degree, the way I've internally experienced them are thoughts. They're based not on what's actually happening, but on conditions that I can't even see, that I inherited from my parents, from their parents, that I'm inheriting moment to moment through subliminal communication with all humans. All of those rules of social engagement, all that stuff, this doesn't apply to. And so most people you interact with, that doesn't make sense to them. In fact, it would probably scare them if you talked about it. It would scare a lot of people, not everyone. Not because of the person that you're talking to, but because of the function of their mind, the function of the thoughts. The thoughts want to stay engaged in a subject-object experience. They want to stay engaged in a relational experience. You're over there, I'm over here. You did this to me, I did this to you. We have this history. We have to play out of that history. That's the rules of this social game. We have to stay in the confines that, yes, you have this history with me, I have this history with you. We did this together, we did that together. We know each other. I expect you to act this way. You expect me to act this way. Yeah, you know all these are all built into the communication. We all know this, right? So to suddenly go, well, shit, that's not real. Like, it's not real in the way I've always thought it was real. And you do know how to direct your attention immediately into this other place that's more almost fundamental. It is more fundamental. It's more immediate, more pure, it's all about letting go instead of holding on. It's all about letting go of all those beliefs that are seen to be not really real, not about holding on to those beliefs. And yet a lot of people you interact with, the communication they're using itself wants to hold on to those. That's what they're trying to do. And I don't mean to point it at another person and say that they're doing it, because it's like an unconsciousness. It's the way our thought systems function, and they bounce off one another, and they kind of require the other one to keep convincing me I'm somebody, and I'm going to keep convincing you you're somebody. And I'm going to do this through stories, narratives, what we've been through, what we know, what we don't know about each other, how I'm supposed to act, how you're supposed to act. Those well-worn pathways suddenly collapse when we realize that's just not like that. None of that's really real. And I know that now. Instinctually, I can feel it in the body. So learning to navigate that, it takes time. You don't have to think about it. It will learn itself. Your nervous system learns without your conscious awareness all the time. It learns how to throw darts at a dartboard without thinking about microscopic movements of the muscles in your hand and arm, all of which you don't even know the names of. You don't have to. It learns. Your nervous system will learn to adapt to interacting with people in a more authentic way, in this way that we're talking about. It will, but it's important to accept the fact that it takes time. It just does. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that happens immediately. Things just take time to like normalize, to clarify. And this is wonderful that it can do that, that our nervous systems are completely adaptable. It's a wonderful thing. It's great, of course. But interactions with others can just be a point of challenge that takes time to iron itself out. The other thing I was going to mention is, well, a couple things. Social anxiety is one of them. Some people have severe social anxiety. They just shut down completely around other people. They go extremely internal. They feel very awkward. And here's the part that I try to address immediately with somebody if I'm talking about this to them, is that the first thing they assume is that it's something about them. It has that sense to it. It's the emotions involved in it. But we have the sense that something about me makes it so I can't communicate with other people, right? Everyone can relate to this. Every human on the face of the earth can relate to this. But some of us are just acutely aware of it more than others, right? Some people have developed a persona to avoid feeling that around other people. And sometimes it's a persona of confidence that is kind of false in a way. It's not, it's a learned sort of confidence, and it's sort of learned in the social matrix, you could say. And they use that to hide from themselves the fact that, God, I feel insecure around other people. I feel awkward around other people, right? And that confidence persona does a couple things. One is it sort of makes them feel better, but in a hiding way. But it also, and importantly, it actually sends signals to the other people of like, look at me, look how confident I am, and you're not, right? It's a little inauthentic, and it's important to recognize that. This, again, when I talk to people who have social anxiety, they have severe social anxiety and always have, and they really think something's wrong with them. So by telling them, or teaching them to like start to look at other people, feel into how they're acting, what they're doing up here and what they're doing in their emotion body. And you'll start to get a different sense of what's actually happening. You're feeling what a lot of people can't feel. Like people go into their personas around others in groups, and they use those personas and interface through those personas. They use them to avoid their own uncomfortable experience of being around people. And not just uncomfortable, but even things that would be considered like on the positive side of the spectrum, like attraction or whatever, right? But the point is, it's an intense emotional experience to interact with other humans, right? Now, when we see that, when you finally go, oh, okay, maybe that's what's really happening. I'm feeling what all these people are feeling. I'm quiet because I don't know what the fuck to say, but they all seem like they're confident. They know what's going on, and like that makes me feel weird. Like, right? That's what we start doing. When you see it differently, and you're like, oh, everyone in this circle is feeling that intense emotion of being around other people, but some of them are hiding behind personas with it. Yeah. Then you can start to recognize that a conclusion you have that something's wrong with me is in error, right? Because there's actually nothing wrong with having an intense experience emotionally around other humans. Okay, I'll broaden that to nature. It's very normal for one member of a species to get very emotionally charged around another member of the same species. Dogs are a perfect example. Take your dog for a walk, and it sniffs everything, right? It sniffs where other dogs peed. It's interested in other animals. It might try to chase them, but it might see other people walking down the street. It's kind of interested. But when it gets really, really excited, when there's another dog, when it sees a member of its own species, it goes freaking nuts, right? It wants to either go over there and sniff it, or run towards it, or be angry at it, or whatever it's conditioned to do. But the point is, it has an immediate physiologic response. That's normal. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't procreate. There wouldn't be species. Any species that doesn't have that characteristic will die off, right? So it's ingrained in us, and it's normal that we have a strong emotional response to other humans, okay? That's really important to see, because until you see that, you're almost always going to conclude something's wrong with you in the social interactions. Now, once you do see it and you feel into it and you experience it more and more clearly, the world starts looking different. When you interact with people, you see how awkward people really are. You're not the awkward one. People are very awkward around each other, walking down a corridor and they don't make eye contact. It's very unnatural, actually. It's unnatural to pretend you're not aware of another human being. It's totally unnatural. But we've learned this through layer and layer of identity. Your children teach you your children early, right? Don't stare, don't stare. The person looks different. Your child like, looking at them, and we go, don't stare at people, right? We have this terrified tone with other people, with how we interact with them. We're obsessed with interfacing in a very socially acceptable way, okay? And a lot of that's important. Like, you don't want to be a jerk and all that stuff, of course. But we throw the baby out with the bathwater when we teach children to grow up and how to interact with other people, when we teach them these modes of persona, fear, all this stuff, instead of just explaining to them how it feels to be looked at by another person, etc., how to get along well and not harm people or say unkind things. Like, you can teach your children all that without having to teach them to literally just be afraid of people, be afraid of making eye contact, being afraid of, right? But it's a hard thing to do when you're mind identified. So yeah, it's very unnatural to be around other humans and not have a strong emotional response. Be in an elevator and everyone pretends no one else is looking at anyone else, and they're all looking at their phones, and it's so awkward and fake, right? It's not natural. We train ourselves to be completely unnatural. And we wonder why we feel weird in groups, yeah? So as with everything, for me, it's just a matter of looking closer and closer and closer at what's actually happening in each moment. Looking at the emotions, feeling into the emotions. Do I feel attraction? Do I feel embarrassment? Where is that? How do I feel that? Do I feel awkwardness? Where is it? And realize the more you feel into that, you might get quiet for a while, and that's fine. One of the other things people conclude when they have social anxiety is, I'm so quiet, I don't know what to say. And that's bad, as if that's bad. And I'm like, it's not bad necessarily. You don't have to be the loud one in the group. There's a lot of research that introverts know more about they know more about human behavior than extroverts. because they actually watch it. They pay attention. So there's nothing wrong with being, quote, an introvert around others, to being quiet, to just paying attention to what everyone else is saying and feeling into what you're feeling and feeling into what they're feeling. That's fine to do that, you know. So I went on a bit of a tangent about social anxiety, but what I have seen in people who have strong personas, who have well-developed personas around other people, okay, meaning they are the confident one. They look very confident with people. They're really good in group environments. They're good with other people. They're good at controlling the interaction. And some people learn this through survival, growing up in a way you have to learn to form that personality, that persona. It's a survival mechanism, and you're really freaking good at it. But what happens when they start to wake up, or when they do wake up, you could say it in a couple ways. One is you just trust life more. But more importantly, you realize that persona you developed isn't necessarily applicable in all situations. When you're a child, it may be applicable. When you're a teenager and you're always in unstable or confusing or environments that are potentially dangerous, you have to do that. You need that persona, and it works. You build it, and it keeps you. But now being an adult, like, I don't need that all the time. In fact, most of the time I don't need it. It's nice to have if I do. If I come into a situation where I need to be in control of the situation, where somebody's potentially dangerous and I can feel it, I'm going to use that personality, and I know how to use it damn well. Yet most of the time it's not necessary. And when we start to wake up, we realize not only that it takes a lot of energy to do that, but that we have to like push our emotions down to build that persona a lot of times. We have to avoid our emotion body, right? Because when you're, say, a child growing up in an unstable environment, your emotions aren't what matters. They should be, but if you're not in an emotionally healthy environment, they're not. Right? What matters is, how are the adults acting? You become very aware of, you know, is mom upset? Is she not upset? Is she dangerous right now? Is she not? Is dad drunk? Is he going to beat me? Or is he calm right now? Like, you learn to manage when you're around parents that can't manage their own nervous systems, you learn to manage their nervous systems for them. You learn to vibe with them, et cetera, all that stuff. So, so when we grow up in those environments, and it doesn't have to be a massive abusive environment. There's plenty of people who grow up in seemingly stable households who have very emotionally repressed parents. This is very common. You learn to be in a certain ways, be a people pleaser. You learn to put other people's comfort before your own, and you learn to ignore your own emotions. Okay. So now once you start waking up and you start dropping those personas, you start letting go of those identities, because you can't help but do that. This is how realization works. Then you're going to start feeling the underlying emotions that are vulnerable, you know, fear, awkwardness, embarrassment. And there's something very nice about those. They're very innocent. They're childlike. They're very real. They're very close. They pull us right into the body. That's good. But part of us that still wants to be that parent to that child that wants to say, no, this isn't, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to do this. But you're going to do this. There's no way around it. Yeah. As the realization progresses, that's just how it goes. You're going to feel everything you feel and everything everyone else feels. So recognizing it's okay to drop into that. And sometimes that equals being a little more silent, spending a little less time around people, a little less over engagement with people for various reasons, whether it's entertainment, partying, etc. You can learn this proactively by listening to someone who's gone through it, or listening to a bunch of people who've gone through it, or you can learn it the hard way and just push and push and push until life will shut you down. Life is ingenious. When you start to wake up, there are forces operating in your life that are way beyond your ability to control them, period. And life will stop you at some point. It will do what it has to do. People get bizarre, strange illnesses that are young and healthy and end up in bed for months. They get depression, end up in bed for months. People get injuries, trauma, like anything can happen to stop you in your tracks. But just know, as the whole thing progresses, as realization clarifies, life will just start rearranging things to show you what you need to see, to put you in situations to feel what you need to feel. And what it always comes down to is just looking closer, feeling more intimately, deeply in, trusting the experience itself, and it all sorts itself out. So anyway, that was like talking about it in a lot of different ways, but it's normal to go through that. It's very, very typical. to go through that. Mm-hmm. Any other questions, comments?
I can say something on that. I relate to everything
Can
you
you talk
said.
a little louder?
Oh, hey.
Hey.
I can relate to that, everything you said, and it's like, it's really for me, it was really a hard thing to go through, because like I was definitely the confident persona, but I was so insecure underneath it. But it took me a really long time to see that, because that confident one was, like you said, like the protection. And like with what happened to me as such a young child, I like, that was so brilliant that even happened, that confidence was built, persona. But it was hard. It was definitely challenging to see it. I think a lot of the times it's like, it's hard to like fully see something when you're still looking from that perspective. And I think like what was helpful for me was just like knowing that like I don't know this, but feeling that there's something that's wanting to come like to the surface, and feeling that like to me, like feeling the suffering of that, like, oh, I don't know, this is like confusing. I wouldn't be able to like understand myself, understand my perspective, understand what I'm feeling. That was really hard, but just to remind myself, like, okay, well, I just am willing to see it. And I'm terrified. I was so terrified the whole way. But like the suffering was so great. Like it was just so bad that it I had to surrender in like with my will, in a way. Like like sometimes Angela talks about natural surrender and stuff, but it's a different thing. Like I had to literally, it's like, I don't know, it reminded me of like when I was Christian for a little bit in high school, and I had to like surrender with my will. I had to pray like, wow, this situation is really fucked up. It's really painful, and I don't really know. Like, I know I can't see it clearly. I know that there isn't something here I understand, but I feel so terrible that I'm willing to say, hey, I don't know this. And that's what I mean by surrendering your will, is to just say like, I don't know this, but I'm open. And like, even like, I don't know this, but I'm open to see. But then you're like, well, I don't even know how to see. Like, where do I even look from? When it's so like crazy. But then you just say, okay, like I'm willing to see, but I don't even know how to open myself to it. Like, I don't even know that. I'm just willing to, and it's like, it's challenging within your own person, because I think it's in some way it's hard to be vulnerable to yourself, because you're protecting yourself from yourself for so long. So even to admit to yourself that like, wow, this is a really vulnerable space, to admit that I'm messed up and I don't know this. And not even you, but just like you can't see what's going on. But I think for me it was valuable to just be vulnerable with myself, because like, yeah, there was the persona around people for me, the confidence persona that I nailed, but even by myself, I had that. Even by myself, I was telling myself, and that's where it goes back to Angela was saying, the self-talk is just the same as the outside talk, and recognizing that. And for me, I had to see like, wow, like when I'm by myself, when I'm in my own meditations, when I'm in my own space, I'm telling myself that I'm good and that I'm confident and that I don't need to be vulnerable, and willing to be surrender in my own space. And just knowing that like, it's like, then that's the space where you remind that child, like, that's safe. Like, maybe it feels way too unsafe to admit that, or be vulnerable in public with people, and that's too chaotic still, but at least to start with your own space, to say, wow, I'm convincing myself that that I'm confident, but I feel very unconfident, and I don't want to admit that to myself. But just to be willing to surrender, just be willing to be vulnerable to yourself. Like, that's the most important person that you can do this for. So yeah, and I think again and again, that was what helped me. Reminding myself again and again, okay, you're safe. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be vulnerable in your own space. And then life carries that vulnerability into the world. That's what it seemed like happened for me. That I don't have to manage people and relationships and environments anymore, like manage if I'm confident or I'm not confident or I'm awkward or I'm vulnerable or whatever I am in those situations. Like, spending that quality time telling myself that it's safe, reminding that little child that needed protection, that it's okay, and that it's safe to surrender, just to let things fall away. Really helped carry that into the world and with people, and the rest sorts itself out.
What if it's more like not like confident or unconfident, but you kind of more feel like you're stuck in a watcher state, and then trying to figure out the interactions from a watcher state is what's, I use the word confusing, but that's like the way it feels, right? Because you're like, I'm not trying to alter your reality or to like have you alter mine, or say that what you feel or think or are experiencing is wrong, or you're not trying to have any influence over any other perception in any interaction, right? Which is weird, because people be like when you watch documentaries, they say the weirdest thing that I always hear is like, I'm not going to interfere with nature. But like literally by watching, you're interfering with nature, right? Like it works that way with like light particles, right? Because it's like a wave, like, or a particle, and if you're watching it, it can be both, right? Like it's like those type of things. So I'm like, when you're in that watcher state, then and you like stay here, then I find it like, I just like a lot of now what, a lot of question of now what, and
yeah.
and I do, like, obviously I feel some sort of sadness, but it's just because more like a lack of understanding. And then you're just like, is it always going to be this confusing? If that makes sense. And it's not it's not like a lack of confidence or otherwise. It's just like, you just don't know. You just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So Rochelle can also talk, of course, about this, but I wanted to mention one thing, because you talked for a while and I wanted to point out something about what you said, and then I wanted to address that as well. But Rochelle was pointing to something I think that's super important, and I'm talking to everyone. I'm talking about this whole process, actually, and that is, I don't even remember the word she used to say it, but I could feel into it, and it's, at some point with this whole thing, regardless of where you came from, whether you had a traumatic past, whether you had a great upbringing, regardless of your emotional history, even regardless of your karmic history, which is a very deeply rooted thing. Everyone comes to this place in this process where it's something, I'm just gonna say, like, it's like absolute innocence. You come to this place where, mm-hmm. I can relate it better emotionally. It's more of an emotional thing, but it's very, very, very fundamental to being human. And from this innocence, you're coming in contact with something vastly beyond you. You could call it God, but it really depends how you're wired and how you think about things. But I wouldn't call it that, but it's almost like that. You come in contact with something that is so far beyond your ability to even understand what life is about, how it works, all of it, all the circumstances of your personal life. And then even what's beyond that, when you're able to actually drop the circumstances of your life and realize, like, oh my God, it was never me that any of that shit was happening to. there's this whole other kind of world you find yourself in. It's like an energetic world, you could say, that you can't really define or talk about, but you find yourself there. Even that, there's a way to be so innocent in that, so surrendered, that this incredibly powerful force comes into play in your life, and it is going to change. It's just going to rearrange your life. Sometimes it's not that it's going to rearrange the story of your life, but it can. But what it does is it rewires how you interact with life completely. And the feeling when that's happening is, if you want to make distance still, if there's something that's trying to hold back from it, it's excruciating. It's really, really, really uncomfortable. Confusing is a word for it, but it's just, so it can be almost devastating. But if you're willing to just kind of let it happen, I don't know how else to say it. Paul Hederman says, it's kind of like when you're having surgery, you have two jobs. Don't move and don't try to be the surgeon. It's that kind of vulnerability. It's very, very fundamental to even just experience itself. If you're willing to be in that kind of vulnerability, life will surprise you. There's a measure of faith that comes into this. It may not do it the way you want it to. It won't do it the way you think it should do it. It can't. It doesn't operate that way. Life doesn't really care about what you think should happen necessarily in the way I'm speaking. But it will change things. It will change things about you, change things about your circumstances, mostly change things about your processing, your perceptual landscape. And you won't know what's happening. You can't know how this is being shifted, because if you do know it, you're going to try to control it. To the most fundamental sense of knowing is about controlling. And so you're really operating, you're so clear, talking to you, I can always feel it. You're operating so close to that threshold that it just requires this weird radical vulnerability that it's even beyond emotion. A lot of emotion will come with it a lot of times too, but it's even beyond that. I keep coming to the term like prajna wisdom, transcendent wisdom in Zen or something like that. But all I can really say is learn to trust vulnerability. Learn to trust vulnerability. That's in the immediate experience of you, of what's even fundamental to you. And that trust I'm talking about isn't something you arrive at. It's a fluctuating thing. You're not going to feel completely able to just surrender to this at all moments. It's not going to be like that. But to trust that even my most basic perception and my most basic way of perceiving may still be a little distorted, that there could be something even different than that, or even more something. I'm open to even that is a very powerful conduit to something that's intelligent, compassionate, and vast beyond anything we can understand. And it's also right here. I was inclined to say that from what Rochelle was talking about. But I think it kind of answered what you just said as well. And yeah, it's a place of vulnerability. It is a place of going back to what we were talking about at the beginning when I was answering your question. There is a feeling of confusion that comes in with this. And it's helpful to just embody confusion. What does it feel like to be confused, right? What is the worldview of confusion itself? As an entity, as a child, it's one of your children, let's say, and it's upset, it's uncomfortable. So you want to feel into it. What's going on? What happened to school? What happened at school today? But in that way, we can feel into confusion itself, right? Because confusion is, I have regard for confusion. I have respect for it because it's important, right? If we're, let's say again, we're like a child in an unstable environment, or just an environment where we have a parent who's emotionally unhealthy and we're very receptive, we're very empathic child, right? If we're in that situation, confusion is is a little bit of a warning sign to us that like, okay, I can't not pay attention to what's happening. I've got to focus on what's going on in my environment to protect myself, right? Confusion is an arrow that keeps pointing to safety. It's pointing to you and it's saying, hey, you need to figure out what's going on in this environment to make yourself safe right now. It's important for your survival, for your physical survival. So when we're out of that environment, when we've matured out of that, or we've grown up, or we've gotten into an environment where safety isn't a moment-to-moment concern for us, right? We all have to be somewhat safety conscious in life, of course. It's, you know, life could be dangerous, but moment-to-moment life for an adult who can take care of their basic daily living stuff and whatever isn't an immediate concern. So when we drop the concern of safety, then what comes to the surface is that confusion. And it's there. We can feel it. Like, whoa, I should be. What should I be orienting to right now? What do I need to pay like attention to? It's almost like a hypervigilant, but it doesn't have an object out there that it needs to pay attention to. So it turns inward. It's paying attention to itself in a way, right? So embody confusion. It's like, go, okay, confusion's here. What does confusion feel like? What is its voice? What does it say? Right? Confusion says, well, you have to ask what it says for you. But for me in this moment, confusion says, I don't know what to pay attention to. I don't know what's the most important here. I need to have a priority system to know where I need to put my attention right now. And I'm uncomfortable until I find a place to put my attention, right? That's what confusion says. It says, I don't understand what's going on in this environment. I need to figure it out. So then we can investigate those beliefs. There's a belief that says, I always have to know what's going on in my environment. Is that true? I don't know. Is it true? Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Let's investigate it. Let's look, and we can look back. Who is it that feels like they need to know what's happening right now? Can you find that one? Or just directly into the emotion. What does it feel like to feel that I don't know what's going on right now? Can I just hold that? Can I embody that? Can I find it in the body right now? And you'll learn that it's okay to feel sometimes like you don't know what's going on. In a sense, you're allowing yourself to be the child held by your own trust in this moment, in life, in the body. So yeah, just again, just keep exploring these things with a point of view or an approach of acceptance and understanding. You know, you can literally self-talk to that sense of confusion. I don't know where to put my attention. I don't know if I'm safe. I don't know if I'm safe. I might be unsafe right now. You know, okay, what does it feel like to be unsafe? And you can also be the adult heart and say, you are safe. It's okay. You're safe now to tell me what's going on inside. You're safe now to tell me what's your view of reality. What are you experiencing right now? You know, it may seem strange to self-talk in this way, but these are energy forms that have been affecting your experience, that have been in your life for years. So why not come into contact with them? In fact, you inherited these energy forms. You didn't create these. They didn't just pop up in you. They've been around for centuries. This is an old voice. This is ancient. And then you start to have a different regard for it. It's like, wow, you're in contact with some ancient energies that most of us don't know are there, that don't even realize. And here I am. I have the privilege of coming in contact with this energy. And in this energy, I relate to everyone. And I also relate to animals. I relate to the natural world. The natural world is very vulnerable in certain ways. It's very powerful also. But, you know, a cat doesn't know whether it should run across the street or not. It doesn't know that. It's vulnerable. Yeah. So coming into contact with these energies, with these places inside of us, is really where this gets sweet. When you're able to just keep going in that direction, the inward direction, the acceptance direction, the moving toward instead of moving away from. Can make it very enjoyable to be human. I'm going to run downstairs for a moment. I'll be back in just a minute.
Nancy and Violet sitting in a tree. Kissing.
Your hair looks so pretty.
Thank you, love.
I love it.
Why do you ignore Chad?
Oh, Nancy and Violet and Chad sitting in a tree. Kissing. Oh, Chad came back at the end of that.
Okay. Mini fridge. Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to mention, just in terms of what we have, the theme of today, with interacting with other humans, is okay. You could say there's a spectrum on which everyone sort of falls in this interacting with other humans. On one end of the spectrum, we may almost not interact with anybody, maybe very solitary, very not in contact with people. On the other end of the spectrum, we may be in like constant contact with people all the time in various ways and so forth. And of course, all of us fall on this spectrum somewhere. And of course, there's nothing wrong with any of that. There's not a right way to be in this sense. But I will say that wherever you fall in that, it can give you clues as to what to investigate. If you have an emotional charge around it, if you have questions around it, if you have concerns like, am I too whatever, am I not enough, whatever, if you have social anxiety, all these different things. So for instance, I'll just use an example. So if somebody has a very confident persona, very confident, and they're really good with people, they're always around people, they're, etc. I might, and they want to investigate like what underlies some of their anxiety about people, about interacting with people and so forth. I might point them to whether they might not have a buried fear of not fitting in, right? A lot of times the part of our life that we purposely construct to be sort of, I guess you could say, like the outwardly dominant part of our life, the part that's most obvious to other people, sometimes we construct that, or oftentimes we construct that because of this fear of a certain place we don't want to go inside ourselves, in our emotion body. And what's interesting is we often won't want to see that, right? Because again, it's based on fear. So to tell somebody who's outward extremely confident or something like that, I'm not talking about anyone specific actually at all. I'm just talking about almost the archetype of that. But there are people like this for sure. And all of us may have a little bit of this here or there, depending on the situation, whatever. But that person's not going to want to look and see the emotion and feel the emotion that says, I'm terrified of being rejected. They're not going to want to come in contact with that. It's not a practice they're going to want to do. And yet, if, however it happens, they actually are able to come in contact with that, they're willing to drop into that. They're willing to touch into that. They're willing to feel that emotion of the terror of being rejected, of being left out, of being a social outcast, of being embarrassed, whatever it is, humiliated. If you're willing to touch into that, feel into that, understand its view, recognize that it's an energy form inside of you, in your processing, in your emotion body, whatever. If you're willing to do that, you'll find a completely different and much more satisfying way to interact with people than having to fake confidence all the time. Yeah. On the other end of the spectrum, it can be, if somebody's avoidant of interacting, they can also explore, like, is there what am I terrified to feel? Like, well, I might be terrified to feel, really it comes down to humiliation either way, but I can be terrified to feel exposed, to appear unintelligent by the way I talk, whatever. So being willing to explore those, because it is a safe place to just avoid people. Of course it is. Yeah, it can be, you can avoid a lot by just generally not interacting with people, or being the quiet one all the time, or whatever, right? There's a part of that person that's not going to want to look at this, right? They're not going to want to see this. Why would they? Why would you want to look into what's going to take away potentially your coping mechanism, right? But if you will look into this, if you will look at what are the underlying emotional fears, even if they're subtle or whatever, what is it that I'm really afraid of that keeps me silent, that keeps me not, in the conversation, that, leads me to avoid contact, whatever. And not doing this so that life will change. You're not doing this to try to become a more confident person or anything like that. You're doing it just out of reality, just out of the love for truth, whatever. If you're willing to investigate, what are those things I really fear? What are the things I don't want to come in contact with? What am I hiding from myself? And then being willing to feel those emotions, embody those emotions, understand them, understand their view of reality. How do they experience the world? How do they experience reality? Where did they come from? Maybe. Do I remember a certain thing in my childhood that triggered that? And I realized, oh, I can protect myself from just keeping distance, whatever. Then if we're willing to go there and really explore that and fully embody it and accept it, then we may find a completely different way of interacting with people. It's much more satisfying. We still might tend towards being a little more introverted or whatever, or we may not. But I'm confident that we'll find a much more enjoyable experience of human interaction, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I don't know. I'm not sure if it does.
Sense.
But yeah.
Also, I think it makes sense, babe. Also, I'll add, I think like one thing to recognize is that everybody in this whole universe is confused about this life thing. They've just learned to avoid the emotion of that confusion. So they're able to ignore it because it's only a thought of confusion. So they're able to build a story around it to say, I'm not confused. I know when I'm having my next child. I know what's happening next. I know what's going on in my life. But sensitive people like us, it's harder to ignore that there's an emotion tied to that confusion. And that's where we come to this group and we learn inquiry and going, well, what is this then? Like, what is this? What is me? What is my life? What is this story about? Is because we're tied. We're not as, there's something that's awakening in us. That's just like we're feeling the emotion of the confusion, the different emotions that go around it. And it's important to just recognize that like everybody's confused. It's not just, it's not like everybody has it together and you're the only confused one, which I think like I felt like that a lot. Like, so I'm sure you guys can relate, like, oh, it looks like everybody has it together and I just can't figure it out no matter what the fuck I do. So yeah, I just think it's like, give yourself credit because you are one of a bazillion people that are confused. You're just You know, and it's a beautiful confusion if you're able to touch into the emotions and actually turn the pattern around. So it's a good thing.
I love it. I love it. You know, there can be, around spirituality specifically, there can be a way of engaging it where you're sure you know everything about it, right? Even if you haven't had the experiential insight or whatever, you still know, you know, all the Buddhist doctrine, and you know in exquisite detail, like you really hold on to that knowledge and whatever. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's great. I'm all for anybody investigating their true nature, in however it works for them. But reality is too flexible to completely be contained in that kind of approach, right? Because there's a whole other side to things where there's a complete unknowability too. Absolutely there is. Of course there is. That's how I started the talk. You can't know a damn thing about what's here right now. It's impossible. There's a famous koan, maybe not a koan, a story about Bodhidharma that relates directly to this. I'll quote it next time because I can't. I can kind of quote it, but I'll probably screw it up. So I'd rather have it directly. Anyway, I guess what I'm getting at is being willing to cross over that barrier of me, of what I've come to believe myself to be, my habits, my tendencies, being willing to cross that barrier to the other side of things is the ultimate in confusion in a way, because you have no freaking clue what's over there. And yet once you cross that line, once you cross over, however that happens, through grace usually, it's like, oh my God, it feels so good to live over here. Then I was so afraid to come over here. It's the best. That's what I've always wanted, actually. And it is what you wanted. It's not that you wanted a certain way of being. You wanted to be free of being stuck in a certain way of being. And so you got to cross over to do that, however you can cross over, through faith, through surrender, through inquiry. To me, that's what Buddha means by the middle way. Not the activity of doing that, but that there's a living dynamic possibility here that is not fixed, and it's also not still. It's not precise, and it's not completely imprecise either. It's actually not dead, and it's not alive. It's not real, and it's not unreal. So, other questions? I'm glad everybody came. Chad, what is that behind you? Is that a bear?
Yeah.
Or?
It's a pillow.
Oh, nice. I love it. It's a dog. Cute.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I'm glad everybody came today. It was fun. Good conversations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Aesop, for coming. Santi, nice to see you again. Take care, all. Have a great week. We'll see you if you want to come back next Sunday. We'll come back next Sunday and do it up.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Welcome. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye, Nancy. Bye,
Bye.
Aesop.
Bye, Angelo.
Bye. See you soon.